Since getting this guitar earlier this year, it has been my main player. It has been living in my rehearsal space and even played a few shows, but tuning stability issues have caused me to pull it from the studio and bring it into the workshop. Whenever I face these issues, the first thing I check is the nut. Especially on these 3-in-3 tuners, the G-string can really bind up in the slot and pull your guitar out of tune. In my case, I was having to constantly retune and had occasional pinging sounds when tuning up, indicating that the string was sticking. In order to address this problem, I removed the nut from the guitar and started by lowering the overall profile. Generally, I go for half circle shapes for the nut slot, allowing the top half of the string to be above the nut. This minimizes the contact that the string has with the nut and lessens the chance of binding. You only need your slots to be deep enough to keep the strings from popping out. Any deeper and the string can catch onto the edges, and that's where you get your tuning stability issues. Using my StewMac files, I take material off of the top of the nut, doing my best to maintain the general radius. This neck has a 12-inch radius, and I want the nut to reflect that as well. I will go in after all of the filing is done with a radius sanding beam to make sure that everything is on spec, but following that profile as I file makes for less work later on. I make sure to go slowly as I file, regularly checking to make sure that I don't overshoot the mark. I can always file away more, but if I take away too much, then I have to start everything over. The nut plays a huge role in the guitar's playability, and a lot of care should be taken when making or adjusting one. Once I've sanded the radius, I move on to shaping in a bevel. This also helps to keep the strings from falling too deep into the slots. Since string slots are filed on a slope, if I was to leave the top of the nut flat, then the strings would sink into the slots in the back of the nut. This, in turn, can cause the same tuning stability issues. Once the bevel is done, I start to sand and buff away all of the tooling marks. I use micro mesh buffing squares and ascending grits to bring everything to a nice smooth shine. Before doing this, I also used a fine-tooth file to remove any deep gouges from the rougher files used to remove most of the material. When working with such small measurements, even this final sanding and polishing can end up removing too much material, forcing you to start again. I, unfortunately, know this from experience. The first few grits do most of the work removing any deep scratches left behind by the tools, so I take a little more time and care between 800 and 3200 grit. Once I get past that point, I can quickly work my way up to 12,000 grit, leaving the nut with a nice shine. Once everything is shaped out and polished up, I can place the nut back into the neck and check the nut slots. Using this nut action gauge from StewMac, I can precisely measure how high the bottom of each string is from the top of the first fret. You can see here that the measurement for the A string is 32 thousandths of an inch, which is a bit high. If these slots are too high, then you need to put down more pressure when fretting the lower frets, which will pull your notes sharp. My target for the bottom of each string is to be 21 thousandths of an inch from the top of the first fret. This distance will be close enough for the notes on the first fret to play in tune, but still far enough above the fret to avoid any open string buzzing. You will also notice that I continuously measure between every few passes of the file. This is because these diamond-coated files can work very quickly, and just one swipe can bring a slot too deep. Just as with every other step, filing too deep can lead to scrapping the whole nut and starting over. This is a very slow and tedious process that requires you to work very slowly and carefully to avoid making any mistakes. If you've made it this far, I would like to thank you for watching and ask that you consider liking this video and subscribing to the page so that I can continue to make content like this. If you have any requests for topics you would like me to cover, I would love to read them in the comments below. Now, I will finally shut up and show you the finished guitar and let you hear how it sounds.